Somewhere in the scorched silence of Arizona, something moves, not quite animal, not quite human, sometimes ancient, sometimes invented, but always watching. From haunted deserts to sacred mountains, the land whispers of creatures too strange to explain and too old to forget. 30 of them, each one more unsettling than the last. You won't find them on tourist maps, but you might find them watching you. This isn't just folklore, it's a survival guide. Welcome to 30 terrifying mythical creatures of Arizona. Don't worry, they're mostly myths. Mostly. Before we dive in, if you're into eerie legends, strange history, and the kind of stories that make you double check your locks, hit subscribe and join us for more unsettling journeys. Let us know in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it right now? Midnight in Tucson, dawn in Detroit. We want to know who's out there and who's still awake. 1. Mogollon Monster, Arizona Bigfoot. If you ever find yourself driving alone at night along the Mogollon Rim, that high forested escarpment slicing through northern Arizona like a geological scar, do yourself a favor, don't stop. Not for engine trouble, not for strange noises, not even for someone waving you down on the side of the road. Because if you listen closely past the rustle of ponderosa pine and the whisper of the wind, you might hear breathing, not yours, not human, something heavier, hungrier. They call it the Mogollon Monster, Arizona's answer to Bigfoot. But this isn't just a recycled Sasquatch with a sun hat and desert boots. No, the stories that seep out of the rim country are older, darker, and more personal. Something about the Mogollon Monster makes people uncomfortable in a way Bigfoot never quite managed. Maybe it's the eyes. Every sighting, no matter the decade, insists on the eyes, red, glowing, as if lit from the inside, as if looking through you is just a pit stop on the way to remembering something worse. He's tall, sure, 7 to 8 feet, depending on who's trembling behind the camera, covered in dark, shaggy hair that smells like copper, rotting meat, and scorched pine sap, a smell that stays with you even after you leave the forest, especially after. Witnesses talk about the way it screams, not an animal cry, not human either, but something that sounds like it was never meant to be heard by anyone who planned on sleeping again. The first modern sightings started trickling in around the early 1900s, though native legends from the Apache and Yavapai peoples mention large, hairy mountain beings long before that. They weren't exactly friendly. They weren't exactly mortal either. Some called them guardians, others warnings. Then there are the tales from the 1940s, forest rangers finding half-shredded tents, hunters stumbling upon clawed-up trees with tufts of black hair embedded in the bark, college kids going missing on weekend camping trips only for their gear to be found stacked neatly by a riverbank untouched, as if the campers had simply disappeared mid-conversation. Of course, scientists have offered explanations. Bears with mange, hallucinations brought on by altitude sickness, a particularly ambitious hoax. But if that's true, then what about the DNA samples? The ones collected from tree bark and campsite debris that showed something unknown but primate-like? What about the ranger who swore he saw it leap a canyon gap no human could cross, only to vanish into mist without a sound? And what about the towns? Pine, Payson, Strawberry. These aren't places where people panic easily. Yet even here, you'll find locked doors, old folks who won't go into the woods without a weapon, and children raised to never wander off trail, not because of wolves or mountain lions, because of him, the one who watches from behind trees that shouldn't be thick enough to hide anything that might, the one who leaves no tracks, just silence. But here's the worst part, and the reason the Mogollon Monster keeps us up at night. It's not just that he's out there, it's that he knows where you are, when you're alone, what you're afraid of. And if a massive, blood-eyed forest phantom seems like the worst thing Arizona could throw at you. Wait until you hear about the ghost camel with a skeleton tied to its back that terrorized settlers, trampled cabins, and, for a brief, confusing moment, proved that the desert might be even weirder than the woods. Two red ghost, long before Route 66 sliced its way through the Arizona desert like a promise no one intended to keep, there were other roads, cruder, older, more honest, dust-choked tin trails winding through sun-bleached mesas and petrified silence, trails walked by pioneers with cracked boots, loose teeth, and just enough hope to stay alive. And it was along one of these half-forgotten trails, somewhere near Eagle Creek in the 1880s, that the first real sighting occurred. A woman alone at her homestead, hanging laundry, when something came galloping out of the red dust like a hallucination. She screamed, not because of the camel. Camels were strange, sure, but not impossible. The U.S. Army had once experimented with using them in the Southwest, importing the beasts from the Middle East like overgrown novelty items, hoping they'd handle the desert better than mules. Some did, some didn't, some ran off, but what she saw that day wasn't just a camel. It was the red ghost, a massive, rust-colored creature thundering across the dry earth with something strapped to its back, something skeletal, human, still attached by weathered leather straps, head lolling, arms bouncing, a jaw frozen in eternal disbelief. Word spread fast, as it always does when horror finds its way into daylight. The story grew legs, and then hooves. Ranchers started reporting the thing terrorizing their campsites, stampeding livestock, smashing through tents. In one account, it trampled a prospector's mule and vanished into a canyon, leaving nothing but prints the size of dinner plates and a long, dragging trail of bones behind it. For months, the sightings continued. Witnesses swore, it was over 10 feet tall at the hump, its hair matted with blood, its eyes hollow with rage. It became a local curse, a nomadic revenant no bullet could stop. Men fired at it, missed. Others claimed they hit it, and it didn't flinch. Always there was the skeleton, strapped tight, silent, dead, and somehow still along for the ride. Of course, explanations followed. Historians now say it was likely one of the camels abandoned by the U.S. Camel Corps, a short-lived mid-19th century military experiment. The skeleton, a dead rider, possibly a soldier or prospector, caught in his harness and left to rot as the beast wandered. Logical, sad, understandable, but that doesn't explain why people kept seeing the red ghost for decades, long after the army gave up on its camel fantasy, long after all the other beasts should have died off. Nor does it explain how the thing always appeared during dust storms, always headed east and always disappeared before anyone could follow it long. Some say it was never a camel at all, that it was something summoned, a spirit of vengeance made flesh, born out of cruelty and desert loneliness. Others think it was cursed, an animal wronged by man, bound to wear that corpse until the desert finally forgave it, which, if you've ever met the Sonoran Desert, you'll know it doesn't. And then there are those who believe it's still out there, somewhere near the old army supply trails, waiting, not malevolent, just unfinished. But whether it was a ghost, a relic, or something stranger, the red ghost forced a question into the minds of even the toughest frontiersmen. What if the land remembers the things we tried to forget? Of course, if you think a skeletal camel crashing through your nightmares is unsettling, wait until you meet the thing that can become your nightmares, the one the Navajo warned about long before tourists ever stumbled across Four Corners, the one that doesn't gallop. It stalks, and it knows your name. If you're still with us after a skeletal camel galloped through your imagination, welcome to the weird part of the map. If you're into creatures that don't belong, legends that refuse to die, and deserts that whisper back, make sure to subscribe for more stories like this. And tell us in the comments, where are you listening from? And what time is it right now? Are you watching this in broad daylight? Or are you alone at 3 a.m. wondering what that sound was outside your window? 3. Skinwalker. There are places in Arizona where silence feels intelligent, places where the air itself watches you, not with hostility, but with a kind of amused awareness. The mesas stretch so far that you start to lose your sense of direction, and the stars hang too close, as if they're leaning in to hear what you'll whisper next. Out here in the long night of Navajo country, people talk about something ancient, something that doesn't just live in stories, but occasionally steps out of them. They call it Yinaldlushi. To the rest of the world, the term became skinwalker, but that translation does it no justice. In Navajo belief, the skinwalker isn't a simple monster or ghost. It's a witch, one who has chosen power over harmony, secrecy over community, a being who can wear the skin of animals, take their form, and move through the world with the terrible freedom of those who've traded everything for knowledge they shouldn't have. The first mistake outsiders make is treating it like a cryptid, a furry rumor with footprints and blurry photographs. The skinwalker isn't Bigfoot. It isn't something you can track or tranquilize. It's more of a presence, a corruption that hides in the familiar. People say it walks at the edge of vision, often appearing as a coyote, wolf, or owl behaving in unnerving ways, moving upright, staring too long, speaking in a voice that's almost human. The old stories describe skinwalkers as shapeshifters who can mimic the face, voice, or even scent of someone you know. A trickster by nature, it uses imitation as its weapon, because what better disguise than the things you trust most? In some accounts, it can appear as your friend, your relative, even your own reflection. Just slightly wrong, it might call your name at night, not loudly, but just enough for you to wonder if you heard it at all. Among traditional Navajo communities, talk of skinwalkers isn't casual, it's taboo, not just out of fear, but because speaking their name is believed to draw their attention. The stories, however, persist. Herders finding tracks that start as human footprints and end in paw prints, dogs behaving as if chased by something invisible, figures standing on mesas at midnight, perfectly still, lights moving through canyons where no path exists. Anthropologists have tried to interpret the legend as metaphor, a story born of social tension, used to warn against moral corruption or the abuse of spiritual knowledge, but such explanations rarely survive contact with those who've seen things they can't name. One Navajo ranger described hearing laughter, not echoing from the canyon walls, but coming from every direction at once. Another swore his patrol vehicle was followed by something running on all fours, keeping pace at 60 miles an hour, then vanishing into dust. Skeptics dismiss it as folklore, misidentification, or mass hysteria, yet even skeptics fall silent when night falls on the high desert. There's something about the emptiness that doesn't feel empty, as though the desert is listening for the next name it can borrow. You might think the Skinwalker is a story about evil, but maybe it's a story about transformation, about what happens when someone tries to become too much, too powerful, too free, because freedom in the wrong hands is its own kind of curse. And if the Skinwalker embodies the terror of something human pretending to be beast, the next creature reverses the equation entirely. A beast pretending to be human. It came up from the borderlands, left goats dry as dust, and convinced half the Southwest that vampires don't always wear capes. Sometimes they have scales. Sometimes they're called the chupacabra. For chupacabra, by the late 1990s, the American Southwest was getting crowded, not with people, but with paranoia. Cattle mutilations, broken fences, dead silence where there used to be barking dogs, and in the arid borderlands between Arizona and Mexico, something began to show up in whispered conversations and grainy photos, always out of focus, always out of reach. The name chupacabra. Literally translated, it means goat sucker, which would sound laughable if the stories weren't so consistent. Livestock found drained of blood, with strange puncture marks and no signs of a struggle. The animals weren't torn apart like with wolves or coyotes. They were just emptied, no blood, no tracks, no noise, just dead, stiff bodies and a lingering sense that something had passed through. Most people trace the legend to Puerto Rico, where in 95, reports exploded of a strange bipedal creature with spines down its back and glowing red eyes. But the creature migrated, or maybe the fear did, and by the early 2000s, ranchers in southern Arizona were telling eerily similar stories, stories that didn't behave like legends. One man near Sierra Vista claimed he saw the creature crouched beside his horse corral, not a coyote, not a raccoon, something with grayish, leathery skin, no fur and long limbs. It noticed him watching and scuttled away, not running, but moving like it had too many joints in the wrong places. He didn't report it, he just built a higher fence. Others weren't so quiet. In areas like Douglas, Bisbee, and the outskirts of Tucson, law enforcement began receiving calls about livestock deaths with unknown causes. Veterinarians were baffled. No sign of predation, no blood loss visible externally, and yet something had clearly gone very wrong. Theories bloomed like desert flowers, rogue government experiments, escaped lab animals, even alien pets gone feral. Scientists have tried to ground the myth in reality. Some point to coyotes with mange, hairless, gaunt, and desperate, which can look almost alien in the right light. Others suggest a form of mass hysteria, a regional urban legend fueled by media, isolation, and imagination. But that doesn't explain the consistency of the stories across cultures, languages, and states. And it doesn't explain how people across Arizona describe the same creature: upright, gray-skinned, with a row of spinal quills and eyes that reflected light in colors no natural predator should have. There's a particular eeriness to the chupacabra legend in Arizona. Maybe it's the landscape, harsh, dry, and filled with bones, that already suggest a predator doesn't need to be visible to exist. Or maybe it's the way the creature always seems to move just ahead of understanding. People see it, sort of. They photograph it badly. They talk about it nervously, but no one ever catches it. No traps, no bodies, just the occasional inexplicably dry goat and a feeling that something out there wants you to know it could take more if it wanted. What makes the chupacabra unsettling isn't its existence, it's its restraint, a thing that kills so precisely, so quietly, that you have to ask, what is it waiting for? And just when you think you've cataloged all the horrors the desert has to offer, the hairy ones, the blood-drinking ones, the skeletal ones, something entirely different crawls out from the shadows of a forgotten cavern, dragging long limbs and too many teeth. A creature less rooted in culture than in something darker, something unnamed. It doesn't want your livestock. It wants your sleep. Locals near Peach Springs call it the rake. 5. The rake. If Arizona were a horror movie, Peach Springs would be that one quiet scene where nothing seems wrong until you realize it's been too quiet for too long. Tucked along the edge of the Grand Canyon Caverns and the Hualapai Reservation, it's a town more known for scenic tours than supernatural dread. But if you ask around, and you ask the right people, they'll tell you about a presence that doesn't quite fit into local folklore, a thing that has no place in tribal legend, cryptid studies, or even old settler journals. And yet, people keep seeing it. They call it the rake. Now let's get this out of the way. The rake is a relatively modern legend, first rising to internet infamy in the early 2000s. But like any good horror, it didn't stay digital for long. Stories began surfacing from real places, real people, and somehow, for reasons no one has pinned down, northern Arizona became one of its favorite hiding spots. Descriptions are consistent enough to be disturbing. A pale, hairless humanoid creature, emaciated, crouching low like a dog, but too long in the limbs to be anything natural. Eyes that seem to glow, but not like a reflection, more like a slow burn. Witnesses report it crawling out from cave mouths at night or lurking near the mouths of old mine shafts. It never attacks, not at first. It watches, and it waits. One hiker claimed to have seen it during a solo trek near the caverns. He described a figure hunched on a boulder at sunset, motionless, silent, silhouetted by the fading orange light. At first, he thought it was a large bird. Then it stood, slowly, not like a person standing, but like something stretching out of itself. It didn't follow him, not physically, but that night, camped under the stars, he said he woke up 5 times, always to the same sensation, breathing just outside the tent. Shallow, wrong, too slow. Another report came from a motel just off Route 66. A family stopped overnight, and their young daughter pointed to the window and asked why the skinny man was crawling upside down. There was no fire escape, no ledge, just glass and the dark. The father didn't check. They left early the next morning, before the free breakfast. Skeptics lumped the rake-in with creepy pasta. Modern digital folklore meant to scare teenagers and sell horror games. And sure, maybe that's where it started, but that doesn't explain how multiple, unrelated accounts across Arizona describe the same thing. Not Bigfoot, not Skinwalker, something else, something newer or older, maybe both. Some believe the rake is a manifestation of sleep paralysis, a hallucination built from fear and stress, especially common in areas with high geological magnetism, like the Grand Canyon caverns. Others think it's something that migrated, not across land, but across belief systems, an opportunistic entity that enters through stories, rooting itself in the fears we don't talk about during daylight hours. But no matter what it is, the rake doesn't need you to believe in it. It just needs you to hear about it, because once you've heard the story, you'll start noticing the shadows a little more, listening for sounds you used to ignore, wondering maybe if the thing crouching beside your bed at 3 a.m. has always been there, and now it knows you know. Still, not all Arizona monsters haunt your dreams. Some live under the sun, out in the open, with names whispered by canyon winds and desert rock, creatures carved into the silence by time itself, like the next ones, quiet, ancient things that peer out from the cliffs of the Grand Canyon with voices made of wind and warnings. Locals call them whispering trolls. 6. Whispering trolls. The Grand Canyon isn't just a hole in the ground, it's a wound, deep, exposed, and ancient enough to make even the most self-important traveler shut up for a minute. It humbles, it intimidates, it swallows sound and returns it as silence. And yet there are stories, quiet ones, of voices, whispers, not carried by tourists or wind, but by something older, something that's been here longer than the Colorado River, longer than time, and definitely longer than you. They're called whispering trolls, though no one knows where the name came from. You won't find them in a children's book or on a souvenir magnet. They don't have a proper origin story or even a face. But if you're camping near the North Rim and hear a voice that sounds like your own thoughts spoken just a second before you think them, that's them. Descriptions vary. Some say they're tall as men, hunched and stone-skinned, blending into the canyon walls like statues that forgot how to be still. Others claim they're more like shadows, squat, gnarled silhouettes that only appear at dawn or dusk, when the sun hits the canyon at just the wrong angle and carves too many shapes from too little light. One hiker swore he saw a troll crouched in the crevice of a red rock shelf, perfectly still except for its mouth, moving as if mumbling something in reverse. He left without taking a picture. He hasn't been back. Most reports are indirect. People hear whispering where there should be none. Couples argue over who said what when neither spoke. Solo campers wake to soft voices echoing off the cliffs, all saying the same thing: don't look. The phenomenon has attracted the interest of fringe researchers, the kind who carry EMF detectors into slot canyons and believe quartz holds memories. Some speculate that the Grand Canyon's unusual acoustics amplify minor sounds into human like tones. Others believe the entire region is what they call a liminal breach, a thin space where reality overlaps with something just slightly off. Maybe what people are hearing isn't trolls at all. Maybe it's a glitch, the desert trying to speak through stone. Traditional Hopi and Hualapai stories do mention canyon spirits, not trolls per se, but little people, rock dwellers, trickster entities who guard sacred places and punish the curious. In some tales, they mimic voices to lure travelers off trail, into cracks and crevices where no trail exists and no return is promised. The canyon is full of those little folds in the rock that feel a few degrees too cold and smell like earth that hasn't seen sun in centuries. One park ranger tells the story of a missing hiker whose GPS tracker looped back on itself for hours before stopping at the edge of a cliff. The data shows he walked in circles, but only in his final steps did he veer toward the ledge. There were no footprints, no signs of struggle, just his backpack sitting neatly at the rim, unzipped, empty. Skeptics say it's pareidolia, hearing meaning where none exists, echoes bouncing strangely. Brain chemistry, maybe, or maybe the canyon is filled with things that don't move because they don't need to. They just watch, listen, and wait. And if whispering rock beings that mimic your thoughts seem too subtle to fear, consider this. What if the next thing doesn't whisper at all? What if it just shows up, hungry, enormous, and loud enough to split the sky? Meet the next mystery, Soyoko, the cannibal giants. 7. Soyoko. There's a rule embedded deep within the oral traditions of the Hopi people, one not written down, but spoken in soft, serious tones. Never mock the Soyoko. Don't joke about them. Don't imitate their walk. Don't tell their stories unless the timing is right. The purpose is clear, and the air feels still enough to listen safely, because the Soyoko are not just monsters from long ago, they're a warning. And sometimes warnings come back. Described as cannibalistic giants, the Soyoko are said to live in the cliffs and high desert mesas of northeastern Arizona. Towering, brutish, and impossibly strong, they appear throughout Hopi legend as dark counterparts to the Katsinam, the spiritual beings who represent harmony, growth, and balance. If the Katsinam teach, protect, and bless, the Soyoko exist to frighten, punish, and devour, and yet they serve a purpose. In traditional Hopi storytelling, the Soyoko are often used to instill caution and respect in children, not out of cruelty, but survival. Stories tell of the Soyoko emerging during times of imbalance, times when people forget how to live in proper relation to the land and each other. They carry baskets large enough to fit a child, clubs made of stone or bone, and they never come alone. They arrive in pairs or packs, always watching, always choosing. In certain ceremonies, Soyoko performers appear masked, draped in black with exaggerated features, gaping mouths, long teeth, wild hair. They roam the village, demanding offerings and threatening to take misbehaving children if not appeased. It's part ritual, part social lesson, and part remembrance of something much older. Because according to the old stories, the Soyoko weren't always symbolic. Once they were real, flesh and blood giants who roamed the land, eating what they pleased and taking what they wanted. Some versions say they came down from the north, driven by hunger and madness. Others claim they emerged from beneath the earth, summoned by imbalance. The Hopi heroes, often the warrior twins or other spiritual protectors, eventually drove them away. But not forever. The Soyoko are said to sleep, not vanish, and sleep, as we know, is just paused waiting. Modern sightings? Few, but there are whispers. Hikers in the high desert report strange boulder arrangements that look less like erosion and more like seating, large, unnatural resting places nestled into cliff alcoves. Ranchers near Tuba City have mentioned hearing thunderous footsteps at night when the sky is clear. A group of college students exploring abandoned cliff dwellings once described hearing low breathing from deep within the rock, rhythmic and too loud to be human. They left without checking, probably for the best. Skeptics file the Soyoko alongside giants from other mythologies, metaphors for natural disasters, social upheaval, or the fear of outsiders. And maybe that's true, but that doesn't explain why the Hopi still include them in ritual life, why they still make the masks, or why those who've worn the costume during the ceremonies report a strange heaviness, a moment of being watched from the inside. And here's where it gets stranger. If Soyoko are giants who punish the disobedient from outside the village, what happens when something smaller, sneakier, and shape-shifting decides to walk among us unnoticed? The next creature doesn't come with booming footsteps or club in hand. It arrives softly, disguised as something familiar, something curious. Its name? Ameipathenia. 8. Ameipathenia. There is a particular kind of quiet you find in western Arizona, the kind that settles into rock formations and fossil beds like a memory the land is trying to forget. It clings to the petroglyphs etched into canyon walls, the ones nobody talks about even when tourists snap pictures and ask, "What does this one mean?" The local guides usually smile, shrug, change the subject because some of those symbols are older than tribes, older than language, and tied to something that still slips between the cracks in the rocks. They call them Ameipathenia. In the oral traditions of the Mojave and Yuman-speaking peoples, the Ameipathenia are small, shape-shifting beings, neither fully spirit nor fully creature, and never fully trusted. Unlike the towering Soyoko, who announce their presence with thunder and fear, the Ameipathenia arrive in the form of curiosity, a lizard on the rocks, a bird that doesn't blink, a human shadow that moves when you don't. They're tricksters, yes, but not playful ones. Their tricks have weight, consequence, a sense of humor sharpened by centuries of watching people take the wrong trail on purpose. The Ameipathenia are said to live near sacred petroglyph sites and hidden pools in the desert, places where rock meets water, where the natural and supernatural overlap. Their appearances are fleeting, but always unsettling. A hiker sees a child staring from behind a boulder, only for the figure to vanish when approached. A rock climber hears laughter above them, but finds no one there. And in every story, there's a pause, a feeling like something is watching, evaluating, not malicious, just amused. They're also said to guard something, not treasure, but memory, old knowledge etched into the stone, stories older than any tribe or map. If you disturb these places without respect, they'll know. You'll feel it in the shift of the wind, the sudden silence, the way your GPS starts spinning without reason. One researcher recounts hiking near Spirit Mountain and watching his compass do a slow, full circle rotation while the air grew colder. He turned around quickly. Ameipathenia legends often involve people who try to take something they shouldn't: a stone, a photograph, a shortcut. The punishment is rarely direct. Instead, the person finds themselves lost in familiar terrain, walking for hours, only to end up where they started. Others report losing time, whole hours that pass like minutes, or vice versa. The most unnerving stories come from those who speak of dreams after visiting such sites, vivid, uncomfortable dreams filled with symbols they don't understand and languages they've never heard but somehow remember. Anthropologists tend to file these stories under psychological effects of solitude or cultural projection. The desert, after all, has a way of warping perception, but some scholars are more cautious, suggesting that the consistency of these tales points to something shared, a presence that's been part of the land's fabric for thousands of years. And here's the thing about shapeshifters. They don't just mimic animals or people, they mimic possibility. They let you believe you're alone, that you understand what you're looking at, and then they shift just enough to show you that you never did. But while the Amai may watch from the edges and test your limits, the next creature doesn't bother hiding. It soars straight into the sky, a winged titan that brings storms with its scream, the kind of thing that makes the desert sky feel too close and the thunder feel personal. Arizona calls it the Thunderbird. 9. Thunderbird. Out in the Arizona desert, storms don't roll in, they erupt. One minute you're beneath a sky so empty it feels like eternity, and the next, lightning forks down like it's picking a fight. Thunder doesn't just echo here, it cracks, it judges, and if you're close enough to the old stories, or just unlucky enough to be listening, you might start to wonder if there's more behind those clouds than mere weather, because some believe the thunder itself is alive and that it has wings. Enter the Thunderbird, a being so massive, so primal, that it doesn't fit cleanly into categories like cryptid or spirit. It's a sky being found across many indigenous traditions in North America, but particularly resonant in the lore of Southwest tribes like the Apache, Hopi, and Navajo. In some stories, the Thunderbird is a force of justice. In others, it is a storm harbinger, a creature whose wing beats summon wind, whose eyes flash lightning, and whose cry shakes the earth itself. Descriptions vary, but only slightly, enough to suggest myth, not confusion. The Thunderbird is usually depicted as an enormous bird, its wingspan stretching wider than two pickup trucks parked end to end, feathers like obsidian blades, eyes like storm clouds boiling from within. Some say its claws can snatch a full grown deer from the ground without slowing down. Others say its shadow alone can turn daylight cold. But the Thunderbird isn't just a big bird, it's a presence, and not always a welcome one. While some Southwestern traditions honor it as a sacred force tied to rain, fertility, and cosmic balance, others view its arrival as a warning, a shift in the balance, an omen that something is about to be uprooted. Whether it's crops, beliefs, or entire towns, modern sightings, more than you'd expect. Ranchers have reported seeing enormous silhouettes circling over canyons. Travelers along remote highways describe being followed by a dark shape overhead, too silent, too big, and gone too quickly. In one 1970s case outside of Prescott, a family claimed their metal trailer shook during a lightning storm, not from the wind, but from something landing on top of it. They never saw what it was, but the roof bore three long gouges that no weather could explain. Skeptics, of course, point to misidentification, oversized condors, optical illusions, misremembered dreams, but that doesn't explain the sheer scale of the stories, or why so many indigenous traditions, separated by distance and dialect, all describe the Thunderbird in nearly the same way. That kind of consistency isn't coincidence, it's cultural gravity. One theory, whispered, never published, is that the Thunderbird isn't an animal at all, but a kind of atmospheric intelligence, a force of nature that became a creature in our minds because that's the only way we know how to deal with the unknown. We imagine it as a bird because we need wings for the things we can't grasp. But whether it's a sky god, a living storm, or something in between, one thing is clear. The Thunderbird isn't just watching, it's circling. And if it unsettles you to imagine something that massive soaring overhead, consider the inverse, a presence that's small, sly, and already sitting beside your campfire. Something that doesn't bring rain or lightning, but stories, mischief, consequences wrapped in charm. The kind of thing you laugh at until you realize it's laughing back. That would be Coyote, the trickster. 10. Coyote, trickster. Mythic coyote. If you've ever spent time in the high desert of Arizona, you've heard it. that yip howling chaos echoing across the mesas just after dusk. It's not a sound you forget, not entirely mournful, not entirely joyful. It's somewhere in between, like someone laughing at a joke they're not sure they were supposed to hear. That's coyote for you, not just the animal, not just the sound, but the being, the story, the problem and the solution wrapped in the same dusty hide. To many indigenous cultures across the Southwest, especially the Navajo, Hopi, and Apache, coyote is not just a creature of flesh and fur. He's a mythic archetype, a foundational force in the way the world works and doesn't work. He's the trickster, the shapeshifter, the bringer of lessons nobody asked for. One minute he's inventing fire, the next he's setting his own tail on fire and blaming the stars. Coyote stories are never simple. Sometimes he's a hero, stealing tools or wisdom from dangerous gods to give them to humans. Sometimes he's a fool, getting distracted mid-miracle and turning an entire river into a mud puddle. Sometimes he's a downright menace, disrupting harmony just to see what will happen. That's what makes him so powerful and so hard to define. In Hopi cosmology, coyote, or Isa in some Apache stories, often plays a role in the creation of the world. He introduces chaos where there was once perfect order, accidentally invents death by refusing to follow directions, or ruins carefully laid plans out of boredom. But here's the thing, the world needs that chaos. Without it, there'd be no growth, no learning, no contrast. Coyote is the bad idea that leads to the necessary realization, the mistake that makes the wisdom possible. But don't be fooled into thinking coyote is just a moral fable wearing fur. People still see him, or think they do. Travelers in Arizona's backcountry have reported encounters with coyotes that seem off, too tall, too quiet, or moving like they're walking on a joke only they understand. In some Navajo communities, seeing a coyote cross your path is a bad omen, a sign that something is out of balance, especially if it looks at you like it knows your name. Even outside of traditional belief, coyote still works his mischief. Car batteries die in the middle of nowhere. Compasses spin without warning. Directions lead to the wrong place. And somehow, the wrong place turns out to be exactly where you needed to go. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe the trickster's just reminding you who's in charge out here. There's a deep irony in Coyote. He's immortal, but never serious. Powerful, but always flawed. The most foolish being in the cosmos, and the one who understands it best. And perhaps that's the most terrifying part. Not the monsters in the woods, or the beasts in the sky, but the fact that the universe might be run by something that values laughter over logic. Still, even Coyote knows when to leave the stage, especially when a new spirit is ready to take his place. One tall and solemn, cloaked in black hair that flows like rain clouds, walking softly through the mesas with the calm of thunder withheld. Next comes the Angakchina, the long-hair Kachina, a figure of quiet power, a ghost of the storm. 11. Angakchina, long-hair Kachina spirit. In northern Arizona, where mesas rise like petrified waves and the wind moves as if it's remembering something, you'll sometimes see them, dancers cloaked in long strands of black, faces masked in solemn expressions, feet bare against the sacred earth. They are not pretending, they are channeling, and the spirit they call down is one of the oldest, quietest forces in the Hopi pantheon, Angakchina, the long-hair Kachina. To the uninitiated, he might seem gentle, peaceful even. Unlike other Kachina spirits, Angakchina doesn't bring fear, chaos, or warnings. He brings rain. His appearance is tied to summer ceremonies where he dances slowly, deliberately, his long flowing hair, made from strands of horsehair or yucca, trailing behind him like a black waterfall. The Hopi say that with each step, he calls moisture from the sky. With each turn, he blesses the crops. With each breath, he softens the heart of the desert. But like many beings in the Southwest, Angakchina is not just one thing. Yes, he brings blessings, but he also reminds of balance, of respect, of the delicate arrangement between people and the land that can be so easily broken. And when that balance tips, even a spirit as serene as Angakchina can become distant, unreachable, silent. According to Hopi tradition, the Kachinas are spirit messengers, not gods themselves, but intermediaries between the physical and spiritual worlds. They live in the San Francisco peaks near Flagstaff, returning each year to participate in dances and ceremonies meant to maintain cosmic harmony. Angakchina is one of the most beloved of these beings, especially in times of drought. His arrival is not just a celebration, it's a negotiation with the sky. But what happens when the sky doesn't listen? There are stories, subtle ones, passed from one generation to the next of Angakchina's absence. Years when the dances were performed with full hearts, but the clouds never came. When the wind blew in the wrong direction, when rain fell on the wrong side of the mountain, the elders don't interpret these as failures, but as warnings. The spirit is still watching, but it does not always approve. Some outsiders have claimed to see visions of a tall figure walking through storms in the desert, hair dragging across the sand, face obscured, unmoved by wind or distance. These sightings are never loud or dramatic. They don't end in disappearances or destruction, but the people who report them always feel the same thing afterward, like something had been allowed to pass by, and they were lucky just to witness it. Scientists don't have much to say about rain spirits. Meteorologists don't account for ceremonial dancing in their forecasts. But somehow the places that honor the Kachinas often seem to hold on to water a little longer. Their crops survive just a bit better. Their people walk a little lighter, even under dark skies. Coincidence, perhaps, or reverence doing what science can't. So, yes, Angak China is a bringer of rain, a comfort, a song in the dry season, but he's also a reminder that power doesn't always need thunder. Sometimes it just walks softly, with hair like storm clouds, and a silence that means keep listening. And not every Arizona creature is so patient. Some, like the next one, exist because people insisted on exaggerating what was already strange, twisting truth into tall tales, and painting nightmares onto reptiles that were weird enough without the folklore. Meet the ridiculous, the feared, the deeply fictional Gileopolis. 12. Gileopolis. Some monsters are born from trauma, others from tradition, and then there are the ones that stumble out of barroom tall tales, clutching a beer in one claw and a cigarette in the other. Gileopolis, for better or worse, belongs to that last category, named like a desert-themed Godzilla knockoff, and whispered about in the stranger corners of Arizona folklore. Gileopolis is less a cryptid and more a cautionary exaggeration, a lizard blown so far out of proportion it circles back around into legend, based loosely, and we're being generous, on the very real and very weird Gila monster. Gileopolis is the kind of creature that only makes sense when the sun's been cooking your brain for 6 hours straight and your canteen ran dry 2 miles back. But here's the thing, the stories don't go away. The Gila monster itself, stocky, venomous, and deeply uninterested in your nonsense, has lived in Arizona's deserts for thousands of years. It's a slow-moving, bead-skinned lizard with a toxic bite and a flair for dramatic colors, black and bright orange, like a living Halloween decoration. Despite its intimidating appearance, it's shy, solitary, and rarely dangerous unless provoked. Gileopolis, however, is none of those things. In the folklore, it's a mutant monstrosity, 15 feet long, upright on two legs, breathing toxic gas or sometimes fire, because, of course, it's often said to stalk the Sonoran Desert like an escaped lab experiment crossed with a cactus and a fever dream. Some versions of the story insist it can dig through rock. Others say it hypnotizes prey with its flickering tongue. And then there's the particularly colorful version that claims it once took down a train near Yuma just by glaring at it too hard. Where did this ridiculousness come from? Like most absurd legends, Giliopolis probably hatched from a mix of misunderstood nature and regional insecurity. In the early 20th century, as railroads, tourists, and civilization began encroaching on the Arizona wilderness, local storytellers and desert-dwelling eccentrics started spinning yarns to remind the newcomers that the land wasn't entirely tamed, and the Gila monster, with its prehistoric look and venomous mystique, made for perfect raw material. People already feared it, wrongly believing it could spit poison or kill with a glance. A few exaggerations, a couple drinks, and suddenly you've got Gilaopolis, the desert's own fire-breathing, livestock-snatching, radio-scrambling nightmare. Over time, the stories merged with pulp magazines, roadside attractions, and crypto-tourism. A few fake newspaper clippings still circulate, claiming that a giant lizard was spotted near Tombstone or Bisbee, usually accompanied by a blurry photo of what is very clearly a poorly posed iguana. Still, locals play along. Some ranches even put up fake Gileopolis crossing signs as a joke, or maybe not entirely as a joke, because here's the catch with tall tales. Even the obviously fake ones are born from somewhere. Maybe it wasn't 15 feet long. Maybe it didn't breathe fire, but something made people uneasy enough to turn a lizard into a legend. And if Arizona can inflate a slow-moving reptile into a towering beast, imagine what it might do with the idea of dragons, not fire breathers from medieval myths, but scaled, horned reptiles said to guard sacred springs, block canyon paths, and wake when you get too close to the water. The next creature is one of those ancient desert gatekeepers. They call it the desert dragon. 13. Desert dragon, giant reptile. In the dry reaches of southeastern Arizona, where saguaros stand like sentinels and ancient stone bluffs glow red in the dying light, there are places where even the wind seems reluctant to linger. Old footpaths twist around boulders, carved by time and heat, leading toward watering holes that don't appear on any map. These are the places where the air gets too still, where stories wait, and in these stories, there is something that guards the water. Not a spirit, exactly, but something solid, ancient, scaled, something that hisses before it strikes. They call it the desert dragon. You won't find this creature in the polished annals of mainstream folklore. It lives in the margins, in the whispered tales of Apache elders, in fragments passed down through human oral tradition, and in the jittery accounts of cowboys who once followed strange tracks into arroyos they never found again. It's not a dragon in the European sense. No wings, no treasure hoard, no castle to scorch. Instead, this is a creature made of rock and rage, a massive horned reptile, often described as a lizard big enough to block a canyon trail, with skin like sun-baked sandstone and eyes that shine like mica in the moonlight. Sometimes it's said to dwell beneath rock formations near sacred springs, sometimes in the caverns of the Chiricahua Mountains, sleeping under layers of dust until disturbed. One Apache tale describes a warrior crossing a forbidden pass in search of water during a drought. He found it just as the sun dipped below the ridge, but something was already there, coiled around the spring like it owned it. He returned to his people with scorched hands and no memory of how he got them. He never spoke again. Others say the dragon is a test, a guardian spirit given physical form to protect water sources from those who would take without asking. In some traditions, it's not entirely hostile, just bound to purpose. If you approach the spring with respect, it lets you pass. If you come with greed, it does not. Modern accounts are rare, but unsettlingly specific. Hikers in remote areas of the Sonoran Desert have reported hearing deep, dragging noises in the rocks above them, as if something large was moving without effort. One group, camping near an isolated canyon, swore they heard rhythmic breathing echoing from within a crevice, steady, inhuman, and close enough to stir the dust. They left before sunrise. Skeptics call these misidentifications, heat mirages, large iguanas, hallucinations born of dehydration. Fair enough, but when people from entirely different backgrounds, decades apart, describe the same thing, a massive horned lizard with scales like cracked adobe and the ability to vanish back into stone, it raises the question, what's hiding in the heat haze? Maybe the desert dragon isn't a monster. Maybe it's a message, a remnant of an age when the land still had teeth and made sure we knew it, a warning carved in scales and heat. And speaking of warnings, not all desert legends are terrifying because of their size. Sometimes the most disturbing creatures are the ones that look almost normal at first, creatures that bounce when they shouldn't, creatures that move too fast, too high, too wrong, creatures like the next unsettling enigma, the giant jackrabbit. 14. Giant jackrabbit. There's something uniquely unsettling about seeing something familiar behaving in a way that it shouldn't, a door that opens too slowly, a face that doesn't blink, a rabbit that's 8 feet tall and staring directly into your headlights. Welcome to the strange legend of Arizona's giant jackrabbit, a creature that sounds like the punchline to a dusty roadside joke until it isn't. At first glance, it seems almost laughable. Jackrabbits are already oversized by rabbit standards, lanky, twitchy desert creatures with ears like satellite dishes and a jump that looks like a physics error. But in Arizona lore, particularly in the more remote areas near Prescott, Payson, and the Verde Valley, the jackrabbit has grown ambitious. Reports describe creatures 2 to 3 times the size of a normal hare, bounding over fences, clearing entire dirt roads in a single leap, and in the strangest accounts, watching humans with an almost canine curiosity. It's not the same as the jackalope, the horned rabbit of tall tale fame, often mounted on pub walls in the Midwest. The giant jackrabbit has no horns, no whimsical origin, and most notably, no humor. The stories are rarely funny. They're just weird, off-putting, a little too real. One Arizona rancher, in a story passed down secondhand, as these stories often are, claimed to have seen one at dusk on the edge of his property. He thought it was a coyote until it stood upright, briefly, balancing on massive hind legs before loping away with unnatural speed. Another account from a night driver near Globe described a deer-shaped animal hopping across the road in 2 bounds, with ears far too long and a posture too low to be anything else. The most unsettling reports involve those moments of mutual observation, where the rabbit stops, turns, and simply stares, not startled, not afraid, as if it's waiting for something to happen. Biologists, of course, write it off. Exaggerated sightings of large desert hares, tricks of the light, forced perspective, and that explanation is mostly fine until you factor in the recurring detail, that sense of awareness, of intent. You can misjudge size, you can misinterpret distance, but it's harder to misread a gaze. And if you think this is just another tall tale spun by lonely travelers and overworked ranch hands, consider this. Some of the oldest indigenous petroglyphs in the region feature exaggerated rabbit figures, not stylized but outsinned. Rabbits the size of men, sometimes positioned next to human figures, sometimes above them. Whether symbolic or literal, the point remains: the image is old, older than wagons, older than bar stools, older than storytelling as entertainment. Maybe it's just a rabbit. Maybe it's the desert playing tricks again, or maybe there's something about the American Southwest, the heat, the isolation, the sheer psychic weight of the landscape that takes the small and makes it monstrous. And if you think turning a rabbit into a terror is strange, Wait until folklore starts importing creatures from across oceans because Arizona doesn't just host native monsters, it adopts them. The next one comes from halfway around the world through campfire stories and cultural crossings and lands here like it was always meant to be feared. Meet the shape-shifting, blood-hungry legend whispered even in desert winds, the Aswang. 15. Aswang, Arizona isn't exactly where you'd expect to find a creature from Filipino folklore, but then again, the desert has a way of pulling in strays. Stories travel like seeds in the wind, and some of them take root where they absolutely shouldn't. That's how the Aswang found its way here. Traditionally, the Aswang is a shapeshifter from Philippine myth, a terrifying hybrid of vampire, witch, ghoul, and werbeast, depending on which island you're asking. In the old country, it's said to live among humans by day, blending in perfectly, only to reveal its monstrous form at night. Sometimes it grows wings, sometimes it stretches limbs, sometimes it separates its torso from its legs and flies through the air, hunting for prey in the darkness. So, how did this Southeast Asian nightmare end up wandering Arizona's backroads? The short answer: immigration meets imagination. In the early and mid 20th century, waves of Filipino workers came to the American Southwest, many drawn by agricultural and mining jobs. They brought their culture with them, their food, their songs, their ghosts. Over time, those ghosts began to shift. Out of place in this sunburnt landscape, they adapted. The old fears morphed to fit new environments. By the 1980s, isolated stories began to emerge from Filipino American communities in southern Arizona. A shadow seen crouched on a barn roof, something skittering across a Tucson backyard, too fast for a raccoon, too big for a coyote. A woman in Sierra Vista swore she saw a figure standing motionless beneath a street lamp, its face completely featureless, until it smiled. Most of these reports were passed off as superstition, cultural remnants clinging to the children of immigrants, but not all the sightings came from within those communities. A park ranger outside of Yuma once reported hearing something with wings circling a campsite in the early hours before dawn. He never saw it, but the sound, he said, wasn't anything he'd ever heard before. Not bird, not bat, just wrong. Some folklorists argue that what's happening isn't belief, it's syncretism, an imported myth blending with local fears. Arizona is a magnet for this sort of thing. Wide skies, empty spaces, no one to say that's not real when the world gets weird at 2 a.m. The modern Aswang, as described in scattered forums and late night Reddit threads, seems to have evolved. No longer strictly tied to Philippine traditions, it's now become something of a pan-cultural shapeshifter, a symbol of hidden danger and quiet violence. One user described it as a thing that looks like someone you love until it turns its head all the way around. Another mentioned a recurring dream of something tapping at their second-story window despite the total absence of trees nearby. The Aswang doesn't make sense here, and that's what makes it worse. Because once a legend learns how to travel, it also learns how to hide. And if the idea of a foreign predator nesting in Arizona's dry heart unsettles you, imagine this. What if the next monster isn't foreign at all? What if it's just a regular predator, a very real one, where it doesn't belong? Big cats, black shadows, golden eyes, no cages, no evidence, just silence, shredded fences, and scories. Up next, alien big cats. 16. Alien big cats, phantom cats of Arizona. There's something especially eerie about seeing something you know shouldn't be there, like finding an ocean wave in the middle of a cornfield or spotting a jaguar pacing through a Walmart parking lot. In Arizona, the equivalent is this: a big cat where no big cat should be. These are the alien big cats, also known as phantom panthers, shadow lions, or mystery cougars. And while the term alien suggests something extraterrestrial, these creatures are more unsettling because they're almost familiar, almost explainable, almost real. They appear as fleeting figures along fence lines, on remote ranches, or in the glare of headlights on dusty roads. Witnesses describe muscular black cats the size of mountain lions, with long, powerful tails and glowing eyes, eyes that don't blink. Some are tawny like cougars. Others are jet black, like shadows that learned how to walk. Arizona is already home to mountain lions, of course, real ones, solitary, elusive, and rarely seen. But what makes these sightings strange is that many happen in places where no such animal has been seen in decades. And the black cats, officially no known species of panther or jaguar native to North America, comes in black. That hasn't stopped anyone from seeing them. Reports have come from all over the state. In the Santa Rita Mountains south of Tucson, a rancher claimed to see a panther the size of a calf slinking through the mesquite trees at dawn. Near Prescott, a group of hikers spotted what they believed was a black mountain lion crossing a ridge, only to watch it leap nearly 20 feet across a ravine and vanish. In the outskirts of Flagstaff, a driver slammed the brakes after something as big as a bear but shaped like a cat darted across Route 89 at midnight. It never showed up on the dashcam footage, but the driver swears it left claw marks on the pavement. Some skeptics point to escaped exotic pets. Others blame misidentified shadows or simple tall tales passed around too many times. Fair enough, until you hear about the footprints. In several cases, oversized paw prints have been found near reported sightings, too large for a bobcat, too distinct for a dog, and yet, when followed, the tracks simply stop. Conspiracy minded cryptid hunters have suggested these cats are interdimensional predators, creatures that move between worlds and leave no trace. Others believe they're relic species, descendants of long extinct American lions or prehistoric panthers that survived in the deep wilderness and learned how to hide better than anything else. But perhaps the most unsettling theory is the simplest one, that somewhere in the vast, underwatched expanses of Arizona, real big cats are roaming, undetected, unmanaged, and unbothered by our surprise. Because in the end, what's more terrifying? The impossible or the almost believable? And if the phantom cats of Arizona leave you uneasy, wait until the next thing swoops in. It's older than cats, more alien than shadows, and not content with walking the land. It flies. It's a whisper from prehistory, a glimpse of the Cretaceous crashing into the now. The locals call it the Neopterosaur, and they say it's not extinct. 17 Neopterosaurs, flying reptiles. Every now and then, Arizona offers a view so wide, so impossibly open, that it feels like you've fallen into another timeline. The air thins, the sky swells. You look up and think, this would be the perfect place to be eaten by something prehistoric. And according to more than a few unsettling accounts, you wouldn't be wrong. Enter the Neopterosaurs, creatures not just of myth, but of deep time. Described as living pterosaurs, these so-called sky cryptids aren't supposed to exist anymore. Science says they vanished with the dinosaurs around 66 million years ago. But in the deserts and canyons of Arizona, a strange number of people seem convinced they've come back, and worse, that they never left. The sightings are rare, yes, but persistent. They come from all over the state. Near the Superstition Mountains, a hiker reported seeing a massive winged creature gliding silently across the horizon. Not a bird, he said, bigger. Wrong. The wings had no feathers, just stretched, leathery skin. In Winslow, a retired pilot swore he saw something soaring above the high plains, shaped like a delta kite, but moving with eerie, organic fluidity. No engine, no noise, just motion. And in the Tonto National Forest, a pair of campers described being followed in the night by a low, whooshing sound overhead. When they looked up, they caught only a glimpse, a silhouette, long-beaked and angular, blocking out the stars for just a second. Descriptions tend to align in uncanny ways. bat-like wings, often spanning 15 to 20 feet, elongated heads with pronounced crests, long tails, sometimes tipped with a diamond-shaped lobe, eerily similar to certain species of rhamphorhynchoid pterosaurs. In many reports, the creature glides rather than flaps, suggesting something heavy or something conserving energy. Now, to be clear, no living evidence of pterosaurs has ever been scientifically verified. No bones, no bodies, nothing caught on a trail cam that couldn't be blamed on a bird, a bat, or someone's overworked imagination. Still, believers cling to the sightings, arguing that if there's any place on Earth where a remnant species could survive, it's Arizona. Wide stretches of uninhabited land, countless hidden caves, food sources, warm climate, and most importantly, plenty of space to go unnoticed. Some cryptozoologists suggest these creatures might be misidentified herons or pelicans, both of which have wide wingspans and bizarre silhouettes when seen in low light. Others point to cultural osmosis. People see what they've been primed to fear by movies, memes, and monster hunting YouTube channels. A shadow overhead becomes a pterosaur because deep down, we want it to be something unexplainable. But that doesn't explain the stories that predate mass media. Indigenous petroglyphs in northern Arizona depict winged creatures that look nothing like eagles or hawks. One carving in particular, near the Little Colorado River, shows a massive animal with wings, claws, and a long snout. Stylized, yes, but unmistakably not a bird. So what are people seeing? Genetic throwbacks? Atmospheric hallucinations? Or echoes of a time when the sky wasn't just vast, it was occupied? And if something from the prehistoric past can still swoop overhead, maybe the desert has even more ancient passengers still walking it, because the next creature doesn't fly, it lumbers, and sometimes it stinks. Meet the red ghost's lesser-known cousins, the ghost camels of Arizona. Yes, more than one, because the desert apparently has a whole herd of the undead. 18. Ghost camels. If the Arizona desert feels haunted, it's because it probably is. Not by phantoms in bed sheets or polite colonial spirits knocking around old saloons, but by something far stranger, something lurching, snorting, and vaguely resentful about its entire situation, something that spits. You've already heard of the red ghost, the infamous legend of a camel with a human skeleton tied to its back. But what most people don't realize is that the red ghost isn't alone. According to Arizona folklore, dusty, strange, and deeply persistent, there are others, a scattered, stubborn few, restless, wandering, mostly forgotten. They're called ghost camels, and depending on who's telling the story, they're either a tragic footnote of military experimentation or a supernatural infestation that just never quite got the memo that time had moved on. The origin story is true, at least the bureaucratic part. In the mid-1800s, the U.S. Army imported camels for use in the desert Southwest, believing they'd be perfectly adapted for hot, dry terrain. They were, but their temperaments were less than ideal. Soldiers hated them, horses panicked around them, and when the Civil War broke out, the Camel Corps was disbanded, leaving many of the animals to wander the wilds of Arizona, confused and alone. That much is history. What happened next is where the legend begins. Locals began spotting rogue camels roaming the desert for decades after the army gave up on them. In the drag of distant dust clouds, in watering holes far from towns, on cliffs where no creature should have climbed. But then the sightings got stranger. Some camels were seen without riders, but left hoofprints that burned into the sand. Others had glowing red eyes or emitted a low, groaning cry that no ordinary camel should make. One miner near Quartzsite swore he saw a camel pass through his claim in the dead of night, not around it, not over it, but through it, like a fog made of bone and leather. When he approached the tracks in daylight, they ended mid-step, just gone, Ghost camels are often described as translucent or pale, some with shimmering outlines like heat mirages given form. Others are fully physical until you try to approach, then they vanish, or worse, they remain but refuse to blink. Multiple accounts speak of camels standing completely still, watching travelers from a distance, unmoving, waiting. Folklorists chalk it all up to misremembered history, cowboy myth making, and the enduring weirdness of an army project that was probably doomed from the beginning. But there's a deeper current to the legend, something unsettled, something unresolved. Maybe it's the ghosts of the animals themselves, abandoned, alien, left to die in a landscape that didn't care about their orders. Or maybe it's us trying to explain why the desert never quite feels empty, even when nothing should be there. And here's a thought: if the very idea of a oi or e aumwa e ghost camel seems absurd, how do you explain what comes next? A creature that swarms, buzzes, and stings, but not like any insect you've ever known. They come in waves, and some say they've grown too big, too fast, and far too smart. The legends call them killer bees, but not just any bees, monster bees. 19. Killer bees, giant, monstrous bees. In Arizona, the air can change without warning. One moment, it's silent, the kind of stillness that feels fossilized. The next, it's vibrating, not with wind or machinery or thunder, but with something older, hungrier, buzzing. Everyone's heard of killer bees, the aggressive hybrid of African and European honeybees that made headlines in the 1990s after they spread into the American Southwest. They're real, and they've earned their reputation. They swarm faster, sting more often, and get irritated by just about anything. But that's not the whole story. Not in Arizona, because somewhere along the line, the bees got bigger, or at least that's what the stories say. In remote corners of southern Arizona, particularly near abandoned mining towns and dry arroyos no longer marked on maps, there have been reports of bees the size of a man's fist, with wings like crumpled cellophane and stingers that glint like obsidian. These aren't your average honeymakers. They don't pollinate. They don't build hives in trees. They burrow. They watch. They wait. One legend comes from outside Bisbee, where an old prospector claimed he found a cave buzzing with heat and motion. The noise, he said, wasn't like bees. It was deeper, more resonant, like machinery crossed with growling. He barely made it out before something chased him, something black and fast and winged. He showed up in town, scratched and shaking, refused to go back, and died the next year without ever explaining what he really saw. A family near Patagonia once found their dog dead, not stung, but surrounded by perfectly drilled holes in the ground. The air was thick with a sound that seemed to hum from below. No insects were seen, but the dirt itself moved like it was breathing. Skeptics, of course, say this is all fear run wild, that the Africanized honeybee invasion made people paranoid, that the desert heat distorts both sight and sound. And maybe they're right, up to a point. But some researchers have pointed out something strange. In certain areas of Arizona, bee behavior really has begun to shift. Hives are forming in more isolated locations, deep caves, mine shafts, dry wells. Their aggression is spiking beyond normal levels. In some rare cases, entire swarms have vanished without explanation, only to reappear miles away with different nesting habits and abnormal growth patterns. Anecdotal? Sure, but unnerving. Folklore around these monster bees often includes details that push the stories beyond biology: a buzzing that causes nosebleeds, bees that don't leave stingers, hives that seem to pulse as if alive in ways a structure shouldn't be. One tale even describes a hive found in an abandoned church, grown over the altar like a tumor, humming in rhythm with something that wasn't wind. Are they mutated, leftovers from a forgotten experiment, or something ancient that we've mistaken for something new? Whatever they are, they remind us that small things, when multiplied and provoked, become impossible to ignore. And in the desert, where even the quiet carries teeth, it's rarely the biggest creature you need to fear. It's the one that comes in numbers. Still, if thousands of buzzing wings seem too chaotic to focus on, the next creature is a bit more concentrated, more specific, more deliberate. Imagine a primate so fast and furious that doesn't belong anywhere near the American Southwest. Now give it claws and glowing eyes and a temper that doesn't care about the laws of biology. Coming up, devil monkeys. 20. Devil monkeys. Arizona isn't monkey country, not by geography, not by biology, and certainly not by logic. But the desert doesn't care much for logic, and neither do the stories that come crawling out of its deeper shadows. Enter the devil monkeys. The name sounds cartoonish, like something from a roadside horror comic, but the accounts are consistent, persistent, and surprisingly detailed. Picture a creature the size of a large dog, 3 to 4 feet tall when standing, but shaped like a baboon on steroids, muscular arms, oversized hind legs, glowing red or amber eyes, fur that bristles like steel wool, and teeth that don't belong anywhere outside of an ancient predator's skull. Most sightings describe them moving on all fours, leaping great distances with terrifying speed. Others say they stand upright when challenged, like a warning. And while the name may suggest something diabolical, the truly frightening thing about devil monkeys is that they don't seem mythical at all. They seem biological, wrong but real. While reports of these creatures have popped up across the United States, from the Appalachian forests to the Midwest, Arizona's encounters are especially unnerving because there's nowhere for these things to hide out here. And yet, they keep being seen. Take the 2004 incident near Arivaca, close to the Mexican border. A rancher reported something tearing through his chicken coop in the middle of the night. He expected coyotes. What he found were deep gouge marks across the wooden fence, clawed up in 3 sharp arcs, too high for a raccoon, too narrow for a mountain lion. His livestock was found uneaten, but scattered, terrified, as if something had shown up, caused chaos, and disappeared, not to feed, but just to disrupt. Another report came from the outskirts of Kingman, where a group of off-roaders spotted what they thought was a child crouched near a saguaro cactus. When they approached, the thing sprinted off into the brush in 3 massive leaps, leaving behind no tracks, but a stench described as burned hair and battery acid. 2 of them refused to return to the site. One tried to. His tires blew out halfway there. There's no official record of any primate species living wild in Arizona, and certainly no known animal matches the physical profile of the devil monkey. The standard explanations are trotted out: escaped exotic pets, feral macaques from someone's illegal collection, misidentified dogs, or large cats seen in poor light. All plausible, none satisfying, especially when you consider the behavior. These creatures don't act like lost animals. They don't forage. They don't avoid humans. They approach, test boundaries, and in some reports, grin. Some folklorists believe the devil monkey legend is a modern echo of older fears, chaos incarnate wearing the mask of a monkey. Others wonder if they're a new arrival, not myth, but mutation, a consequence of the Southwest's strange blend of isolation, heat, and the occasional lab complex that definitely doesn't exist out past the fence. But whether they're demons in disguise or just an evolutionary mistake that won't die off, devil monkeys represent something truly upsetting: the wild rewritten, the natural corrupted. And if a snarling, clawed primate can leap its way into Arizona's nightmare roster, Imagine what happens when the skies get involved again, not with spirits, but with thunder, not with myth, but with photo evidence. Because coming next is the bird that broke reality in a small desert town, Arizona's own localized legend, the Tombstone Thunderbird. 21. Tombstone Thunderbird. In a place called Tombstone, you expect ghosts, gunfights, maybe the occasional outlaw spirit tipping its hat in a dusty mirror. What you don't expect, or rather what you're not prepared to expect, is a bird so large it breaks the scale, a creature so absurd in scale it should exist only in myth, bad Photoshop, or paleontology textbooks. And yet, if you believe the stories, the Tombstone Thunderbird did exist. The legend goes back to 1890, a time when Arizona was still rough, wild, and barely stitched together by railway and rumor. According to a now infamous account, two cowboys near Tombstone allegedly shot and killed an enormous winged creature unlike anything they'd ever seen. The animal reportedly had smooth skin like a bat, no feathers, an elongated beak, and a wingspan of over 30 feet. They supposedly dragged its body back to town, where it was displayed for photographs, measured, and then vanished. No photograph has ever been conclusively proven to exist, though countless people swear they've seen it. I remember that picture, they say, always in past tense. It usually involves a group of men standing beside the body of a massive, bird-like beast nailed to a barn. The photo has become a cryptid itself, the most remembered picture that never existed. But photo or not, the story stuck. And over the years, sightings in the Tombstone area and throughout southern Arizona began to accumulate. Hunters, ranchers, even a school teacher in the 1940s claimed to have seen a flying alligator pass overhead, casting a shadow so large she thought a plane was crashing. Descriptions remain strangely consistent: massive wings, sometimes leathery like a pterosaur's, a long, pointed head with a hooked beak, no feathers, a screech that sounds like rust being torn in half. Skeptics dismiss it, of course. They suggest these sightings are just misidentified condors, turkey vultures seen at odd angles, or hoaxes built on the foundation of one tall tale. Others point to the mental wear and tear of desert life: long days, heat shimmer, too much solitude, and the occasional snakebite induced fever dream. But the Thunderbird's staying power in Arizona folklore isn't just about birdwatching gone wrong. It's about the feeling that something enormous still owns the sky, that the clouds might part one day and reveal a secret the desert's been keeping since the Mesozoic era. And then there's the timing of the legend. Tombstone, 1890, a town named for death, famous for violence, suddenly claiming a victory over something primordial. It feels symbolic, like the Wild West wasn't just taming bandits, it was trying to kill the last remnants of chaos itself, or at least pin it to a barn and take a blurry photo. But if the Tombstone Thunderbird hints at something colossal and ancient swooping through the sky, the next creature turns the absurdity knob hard to the right, because somewhere, somehow, Arizona folklore also gave us a cryptid that sounds like it came from a children's cartoon or a late night dare. Get ready for a name that no one understands, a creature no one can describe properly, and a presence that makes zero sense. Coming next, Gorp. 22. Gorp. Every region has that one creature, the wild card, the cryptid that doesn't play by the rules of narrative, taxonomy, or even common sense. It doesn't come with a neat origin story or fit into any established mythos. It's just there, lingering at the ragged edges of local folklore like a smudge no one can wipe off. In Arizona, that creature is the baffling, elusive, and entirely ridiculous sounding entity known as Gorp. Yes, Gorp. The name itself defies expectation. It doesn't sound like a monster. It sounds like a hiking snack or a noise someone makes when they step on a Lego. And yet, if you start digging through the more obscure corners of Arizona cryptid forums, low-budget documentaries, and decades-old Xeroxed zines, you'll find references, vague, contradictory, and stubbornly persistent, to a creature that locals simply call gorp. Descriptions vary wildly, which is either the mark of a hoax or a truly unclassifiable entity. According to one thread posted on a now-defunct cryptid message board in the late 2000s, gorp is a grayish blob with legs, maybe six, maybe two, with tiny arms like twigs and a face that keeps changing. Another account, supposedly from an old rancher outside of Sholo, claimed gorp was like a sloth crossed with a spider, but with eyes like a person, too knowing. In both cases, the encounter ended the same way. The witness blinked, and gorp was gone. Some say it's humanoid. Others describe it as quadrupedal, or unsettlingly capable of switching between the two. One account from a group of campers in the White Mountains reported seeing something that looked like a child-sized mannequin running on all fours. When they shined a flashlight at it, the thing stood up slowly, tilted its head, and walked backward into the woods. Gorp sightings rarely involve aggression. Instead, they're defined by absurdity and discomfort. Witnesses report odd environmental effects, the sudden smell of wet copper, flickering lights, animals going silent. In one case, a man claimed his radio switched stations on its own whenever he got near the area where he'd first seen gorp, and always to static. So what is it? A cryptid born from a prank that went too far? A side effect of radiation, mold spores, or desert madness? Some folklorists have compared it to the Fook monster or Flatwoods monster, local legends that began as brief encounters and snowballed out into full-blown myth. Others believe gorp is less of a creature and more of a placeholder, the shape that uncertainty takes when you know you saw something, but no known animal comes close. Still, the most compelling theory is that gorp isn't a monster at all, but a kind of psychic echo, a manifestation of Arizona's landscape of extremes, a desert hallucination that leaves real footprints, a desert joke with teeth. And here's the problem: jokes don't usually leave claw marks, but if gorp feels too strange to take seriously, the next creature pulls us right back into the territory of real primal fear. It's not bizarre, it's not funny. It's a predator straight from the Ice Age, one that refuses to stay extinct. In the canyons and ghost towns of Arizona, some still whisper about sightings of something massive, striped, and very toothy. Up next, the phantom saber-toothed tiger. 23. Saber-toothed tiger, ghost or phantom. Most ghosts wear clothes. That's the odd but comforting truth of hauntings. They tend to show up in trousers or tattered dresses, trapped in the same century they died in. But Arizona has something stranger, something that never wore clothes, something that didn't walk upright, something with fangs so large they curve past the jawline like ivory scythes. Welcome to the legend of Arizona's phantom saber-toothed tiger. Now, to be clear, Smilodon, the real saber-toothed cat, has been extinct for about 10,000 years. Its bones have been dug up in tar pits and dry caves, cataloged in museums, and neatly filed under prehistoric fauna. Arizona itself has yielded fossil evidence of these enormous predators, especially in the southern and central regions of the state, where ancient cats once stalked bison across scrubby plains. So yes, they were here, but according to a growing number of weird, consistent, and deeply unsettling accounts, they still are. Sightings of phantom big cats in Arizona aren't new. We've already met the alien big cats, oversized cougars, panthers, and jaguars that appear in places they shouldn't. But the saber-toothed ones are different. They're larger, stranger, older, and they come with a signature feature that makes misidentification almost impossible. Those unmistakable curved upper fangs, long, thick, and wickedly out of proportion with modern cats. Witnesses often describe a creature that appears just for a few moments, usually during dawn or dusk, as if avoiding full sunlight. It's said to have a broad chest, stocky limbs, and a slow, deliberate gait, like something that knows nothing around it can possibly be a threat. More than once, people have mentioned an eerie silence accompanying the encounter. Not a roar, not a growl, just the world holding its breath. One of the earliest modern accounts comes from the 1930s near Cochise County, where a hunter claimed to have seen a lion with tusks crouching near a riverbed. He fired at it, not out of aggression, he said, but disbelief. The bullet passed through it like mist. It turned, it looked at him, then it was gone. More recent reports, mostly from hikers, campers, and a few night shift miners, describe the same features: a huge feline, low to the ground but unnaturally bulky, fur that seems patchy or gray like smoke. And of course, the teeth. Always the teeth. Skeptics suggest misidentifications, maybe a trick of light on a mountain lion, maybe the mind filling in blanks with fossil images from textbooks or museum visits. But again, those teeth, you don't hallucinate teeth like that unless something told you to. Some theories tread into the paranormal, that this is a residual imprint, a ghost not of a person but a species, a memory of a predator so dominant it carved itself into the land's psychic echo. Others believe it's a time slip, that in certain places the veil between past and present frays just enough to let a few seconds of prehistory bleed through. Whatever the cause, one thing is certain: when people see the phantom saber-toothed tiger, they don't forget it. It doesn't chase, it doesn't roar, it just watches, a relic of the age when we weren't at the top of the food chain. And if the idea of an ancient predator stalking the present isn't unsettling enough, the next entity doesn't just blur time, it distorts meaning. It's not a beast exactly, but a symbol that got tired of being symbolic. A figure from indigenous cosmology that moves, that breathes, that waits at the center of a labyrinth carved into the land. Coming up next, Man in the Maze. 24. Man in the Maze. There are symbols that feel old, then there are symbols that feel awake, the kind that don't just decorate pottery or mark tribal lands, but seem to lean forward, watching, waiting, carved into petroglyphs across Arizona's deserts and etched into the collective memory of the Tohono O'odham and Pima Akimel O'odham peoples. Few images are as quietly unsettling as the man in the maze. On the surface, it looks simple: a stick figure man standing at the entrance to a spiral-shaped labyrinth. But ask around in southern Arizona, among those who still live near the ancient canals, who still walk the same trails their ancestors once did, and you'll find that the man in the maze isn't just a metaphor, it's a presence, a pattern with intention. Traditionally, the man in the maze represents life's journey, the twists, turns, setbacks, and decisions that define our time on Earth. As you walk the maze, you face challenges, make choices, and eventually arrive at the center where you're greeted by the sun god or the Great Spirit. It's a powerful image of reflection, transformation, and meaning. But over time, stories have grown around it that hint at something more literal. Because what if the maze isn't just a symbol of life's path? What if it's a place, and what if the man in it is still walking? In certain Pima and Tohono O'odham stories, the man in the maze isn't just a teaching tool. He's a being, a spirit, a guardian, or perhaps a trapped soul, endlessly circling the spiral, never quite reaching the center. Some say he's Aitoi, the elder brother, a creator figure who once led the people from the underworld. Others say he's what became of Iitoi, twisted by time, solitude, and the burden of watching humanity struggle through the same maze he escaped. There are rumors, always secondhand, always whispered about hikers near Tumamoc Hill or the Casa Grande ruins who found spiral etchings that weren't there the day before, or about travelers who follow a dry riverbed and find themselves in a strange clearing surrounded by concentric patterns burned into the ground, like the earth itself was trying to explain something. One man even claimed he saw footprints spiraling into the center of a rock formation and none coming out. More unsettling are the nighttime sightings, a figure standing still on a distant ridge, too symmetrical, too tall, watching, always at the threshold of the spiral, never inside, never out, as if caught between steps. Skeptics say the man in the maze is just a brilliant metaphor, co-opted by New Age tourism and twisted into supernatural nonsense by modern folklore. And maybe they're right, but the symbol endures. It's found on jewelry, blankets, murals, tattoos. It shows up in dreams, it loops, it recurs, resurfaces like something unfinished. And what makes the man in the maze so unnerving isn't what he does, it's what he represents, the possibility that life isn't a journey forward, but a circle we never escape, a pattern we only think we're choosing. Of course, if wandering a spiritual labyrinth isn't strange enough, Arizona mythology has other figures waiting at the center, divine, beautiful, and utterly alien, deities who change with the seasons and sometimes change you. Next, white painted woman, also known as changing woman, the goddess who smiles as she rewrites the rules. 25. White painted woman, changing woman, out in the high desert where the land rolls between sharp mountain spines and vast empty sky. There are things that don't just haunt, they become. The heat becomes silence, the silence becomes presence, and the presence becomes story. Among the Apache and Navajo peoples, few stories are older or more difficult to define than that of white painted woman, also known as changing woman. She isn't a monster, not in the traditional sense, but don't mistake that for safety. The danger here isn't teeth or claws, it's transformation. To the Apache, white painted woman is a creator figure, a divine ancestral being who emerged after a great flood to repopulate the earth. She lived in isolation in a mountain cave, some say in the White Mountains of eastern Arizona, until she was made pregnant by the sun and later by the rain. From her came two sons, one who brought peace and one who brought war. She represents duality, but also cycle, birth and death, rain and drought, youth and old age. She is the land itself, alive, shifting, unpredictable. In Navajo tradition, she is changing woman, one of the most powerful holy people. She governs the seasons, she ages and renews herself endlessly. She walks across the land without leaving footprints, yet somehow every flower blooms behind her. She is revered, loved, but also feared because she doesn't stay still. You don't meet her the same way twice. Across both traditions, she's associated with ceremony. In Apache culture, young women undergo a sacred ritual called the sunrise dance, marking their transition into adulthood. The ceremony embodies the essence of white painted woman, grace, endurance, power, and invokes her presence. For 4 days, girls dance, fast, and pray, becoming part of a lineage that stretches into myth. Many say they feel her there, not metaphorically, but physically. The wind shifts, the temperature drops, time changes its pace, and yet she rarely appears directly. When she does, it's never in a way you expect. In scattered modern accounts, travelers in remote parts of Arizona, especially near ancient ceremonial grounds, have reported seeing a woman in white, sometimes dressed in traditional regalia, sometimes barefoot, always luminous but never glowing. She might be singing or simply watching. She never speaks, but those who encounter her are often changed afterward. Some report vivid dreams for weeks. Others become obsessed with symbols they don't understand. Spirals, cornstalks, crescent moons. A few have claimed they suddenly understood a language they'd never studied. Folklorists often file her under cultural deity or mythic archetype. safely removed from cryptid status, but her legend persists not because people fear her, but because they can't pin her down. She isn't one thing. She doesn't stay in one place. She moves through the seasons like wind through cottonwood, soft but undeniable. The real terror of changing woman is subtle. She reminds you that nothing stays the same. Not the desert, not your body, not even your memory. She is the change you didn't see coming, the beautiful force that rearranges you without asking. And if you thought shape-shifting goddesses were as far as the unexplained could go, think again, because next come the others, the many others, spirits without names, faces without form, entities that walk through story and silence alike. They're called the Holy People, and Arizona is full of them. You just have to know when and where to look. 26. Holy People, spiritual entities. Arizona is full of names you don't say lightly. Some belong to places, others to ancestors, but a few belong to beings you don't speak of unless the fire is low, the stars are out, and the story has earned its right to be told. They are known in Navajo tradition as the Holy People, or Diindinae, not gods in the Western sense, not monsters either, more like forces, presences, spirits that walk the boundaries between this world and the one underneath it, or above it, or just next to it, depending on which version of reality you're using that day. There's no single shape to them, no standard origin. Some take human form, others are described as light, wind, sound, or a kind of intention given weight. They are as old as the first stories and just as hard to hold on to. In Navajo cosmology, the Holy People were the ones who led the Diné out of the underworld through a series of worlds until they reached this one, the glittering world. They taught songs, healing, structure, and ceremony. They built balance, and then they left, but not entirely, because the Holy People don't disappear. They withdraw, and sometimes they return. Among the most commonly referenced are the hero twins, Monster Slayer, and Born for Water, divine siblings who rid the world of ancient monsters during the Mythic Age. They were guided by their mother, Changing Woman, and their father, the Sun. But these twins weren't just destroyers. They were teachers, too, of how to navigate a dangerous world filled with unpredictable powers. Other holy people are more ambiguous, like Talking God, the spirit of language and ceremony, who sometimes appears as an old man with white cornmeal dust on his clothes, or Black God, associated with fire and the stars, a figure feared, respected, and often misunderstood. He's said to have placed the constellations in the sky, shaping the cosmos with glowing embers. And then there's Water Sprinkler, Wind's Child, Turquoise Boy, and dozens of others, each with their own domain, each deeply woven into the Navajo spiritual map. But here's where it gets strange. These aren't just mythic figures trapped in the past. People still see them, not in the cheap, glowing ghost way, but in flashes of unexplainable presence, a sudden voice in the wind that speaks in the wrong language but makes perfect sense, a shadow moving against the grain of sunlight, a figure standing at the edge of a ceremony, not participant, not observer, just Jimaos there. In some cases, entire communities have experienced visitations, a communal dream, a sense of being watched, not malevolently, but with the cold clarity of something judging your intentions. It's not unusual during sacred ceremonies like the night chant or the blessing way for those involved to report an inexplicable stillness, a heaviness in the air, something else breathing in rhythm with the drum. To outsiders, this all sounds like religion, myth, metaphor, but in these communities, it's as real as stone. And what makes the Holy People so unsettling isn't just their power, it's their selective attention. They don't come for everyone. They don't respond to demands. You don't summon them. If they show up, it's because something is out of balance. And balance in the desert is a fragile thing. Of course, not all spiritual entities stay attached to ancient names and sanctioned rituals. Some wander, some linger, and some simply attach themselves to places, to abandoned mines, to broken towns, to half collapsed outposts where the wind talks to itself and something listens back. Next, we descend into these places where ghosts and spirits of haunted places still walk the dust-blown ruins of Arizona's past. 27. Ghosts and spirits of haunted places. Arizona doesn't do haunted houses the way the movies tell it. There are no creaky mansions behind wrought iron gates, no gloomy attics full of cursed dolls. The ghosts here don't rattle chains. They stare. They wait. They whisper through stone, not wallpaper, because in Arizona, the hauntings aren't confined to rooms. They belong to places. Entire landscapes soaked in silence and stories that won't stay buried. The state is littered with ghost towns, literal ones, left behind when the mines dried up, the railroads rerouted, or the land simply gave up the illusion of being conquered. Jerome, Bisbee, Tombstone, Vulture City, their main streets might still serve tourists during daylight, but once the sun dips below the hills, everything changes. Locals will tell you not to go poking around after dark, not because of wild and animals, but because the desert remembers, and sometimes it plays those memories back. In Jerome, once called the wickedest town in the West, people still report sounds of mining carts scraping along rails that haven't existed in a century. Doors slam in buildings that have no working hinges. A man in old miner's clothes has been seen staring out the windows of the old Jerome Grand Hotel, a building that used to be a hospital, and before that, an asylum. He doesn't react to questions. He just watches like he's trying to remember who you are. In Bisbee, deep inside the Lavender Pit and its surrounding tunnels, workers and explorers have described hearing voices in Spanish and English despite being alone. One man swore he heard someone humming just around the bend of a collapsed shaft. When he checked, there was no one there, but his flashlight flickered, and the temperature dropped by nearly 30 degrees in less than a minute. Tombstone, of course, is practically required to be haunted. Its history is a patchwork of duels, burials, and disasters. But beneath the tourist attractions and historical reenactments, there are real reports of figures walking Allen Street at night in old-time boots, only to vanish when approached. One saloon owner claimed to hear footsteps on the upper floor every night for months, even though the building's second story had long since been sealed off. And then there are places that aren't even towns anymore, just ruins. Stone foundations, half covered by sand, abandoned mining shafts with collapsed entries and warning signs long faded to rust. These are the places where people go missing for no good reason, where compasses spin, where radios don't work, places the locals don't name, places maps void. Not all the ghosts here are human. Some are described as shapes, heatless shadows that don't belong to anything, faces in the rock, lights in dry wells. Sometimes it's not what you see, it's what refuses to be seen. The blankness, the empty door frame, the feeling that something just slipped out of view, but not far enough. Skeptics will say it's electromagnetic anomalies, leftover industrial energy, or the human brain assigning emotion to decayed architecture. And maybe that's true, but here's what they can't explain: the pattern, the consistency, the way everyone who steps into these places, believer or not, comes out quieter than they went in. Still, some spirits don't float or moan. Some are fixed, embedded in the stone itself, watching from the carvings they inspired, or perhaps from within. In the next tale, we explore the ancient guardians of Arizona's rock art, beings not just remembered in petroglyphs, but housed in them. Coming next, petroglyph spirits and rock guardians. 28. Petroglyph spirits and rock guardians. You don't find petroglyphs in Arizona by accident. They're not on tourist maps. They're not near the gift shops. You have to hike to them, climb through washes, crawl under ledges, and follow trails that feel older than memory. And when you find them, spirals, animals, stars, stick figures mid-dance or mid-fight, they don't explain themselves. They just exist, carved into basalt, sandstone, or volcanic glass, as if left there not to be understood, but remembered and maybe watched. Because according to many indigenous traditions in the Southwest, particularly among the Hopi, Zuni, and Puebloan peoples, some of these carvings aren't just art, they're inhabited. They mark places where spirits dwell, guardians, tricksters, and ancient beings who don't live in the past so much as live through it, beings that still observe silently through eyes chiseled into rock. They're sometimes referred to as rock guardians or simply as the spirits in the stones. Some are said to be protectors, wardens of sacred land, water sources, or ancestral trails. Others are testers placed near ceremonial sites to judge the intentions of those who arrive. They don't move, at least not in ways we understand, but their presence is heavy, felt, unmistakable. In some stories, the guardians were once human, medicine people or warriors who asked to become part of the land in order to continue protecting it. Their spirits embedded in stone, they now watch over the desert in permanent vigilance. In others, the spirits were never human to begin with, beings made of earth, wind, and silence, attracted to the vibrational residue of ritual. And then there are the warnings. Visitors who mock or disrespect these sites by touching the carvings, carving over them, or simply approaching them without permission have reported strange effects. Cameras malfunction, batteries drain instantly, people lose their way in areas they've hiked a dozen times. One man claimed to have blacked out for 2 hours after taking a rubbing of a spiral glyph. When he came to, his paper was blank. The rubbing was gone, but the spiral had deepened as if the rock had finished carving itself. Some of the most chilling tales involve figures glimpsed near petroglyph sites that weren't there a moment before. Tall, still shapes that resemble the glyphs themselves, stick-like bodies with outstretched arms, circular heads, and no features. One hiker near Painted Rock Petroglyph site outside Gila Bend swore he saw a humanoid figure crouched beside a boulder carved with three-eyed faces. It didn't move, but he couldn't look away. His GPS glitched. When he looked back up, the figure was gone, but the rock was warm to the touch, almost vibrating. Skeptics dismiss these stories as pareidolia, the brain's tendency to find patterns in randomness, a trick of the eye, sunlight and shadow on rough stone. And yet, the feelings persist, the weight in your chest, the certainty that something saw you before you saw it. Archaeologists will tell you these petroglyphs are communication tools, messages, maps, ceremonial notations. They're right, but maybe they're also something else. Keys, not just to the past, but to something still awake. And while the stone may be sacred, Arizona also has a flair for folklore far more infernal, because not every myth begins in ceremony. Some are born in frontier fear, tales of cloven hooves, burning footprints, and riders who never dismount. Up next, the devil in Arizona lore, where the line between campfire story and cosmic accusation gets blurry. 29. The devil in Arizona lore. Arizona doesn't hide its strangeness. It wears it like a second skin, and in the way the rocks lean, the way the stars crowd the sky, the way even silence sounds like it's waiting for something. And sometimes that something shows up with hooves. In frontier folklore, particularly in the southern deserts and borderlands, you'll find scattered but persistent accounts of a devil figure, not metaphorical, not religious in the Sunday school sense, but a literal presence. Something seen, something heard, something that in classic Southwest fashion doesn't bother to knock. Call it the desert devil, the rider in red, or simply the thing that wasn't dust. Whatever the name, the idea is the same: a humanoid figure, sometimes riding a dark horse, sometimes walking alone, trailing heat, silence, and unexplained dread. The most famous devil related tale in Arizona is that of the Red Ghost, the spectral camel with a corpse strapped to its back, covered earlier in this series. But the Red Ghost isn't the only one blamed for the inexplicable. In some versions of the story, it wasn't just a camel gone rogue, it was cursed, driven by something darker, something riding inside it, not on top of it. That's where the devil figure begins to slither into frame, not as a standalone monster, but as a corruption agent, infecting beasts, places, and even people. Stories from the Cochise County and Patagonia Mountains areas tell of an eerie traveler dressed in black, seen walking down empty roads in the heat of day, never casting a shadow, never leaving footprints. Ranchers reported cattle stampedes caused by nothing, and afterwards, the ground was scorched in hoof shaped circles, not deep, not fiery, just wrong, like something heavy had passed through, and the land hadn't quite recovered. In Bisbee, there's a lesser known folktale about a gambler who won too many hands at a saloon card table in 1888. The man across from him wore gloves and never blinked. When the gambler accused him of cheating, the stranger removed his hat. The room went silent. The gambler went missing. The next morning, two burned cards, an ace and a joker, were found fused into the tabletop. No fire had been set. Even modern accounts continue the pattern. A hiker near Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument in the 1990s reported seeing a goat-legged man standing alone in the middle of the trail at dusk. No sound, no movement, just standing. The man disappeared when the hiker blinked. Days later, the hiker's camera roll had one extra image, a blur of red and black, too distorted to identify, but clearly not the landscape. Folklorists argue that the devil in these stories is less about religion and more about moral metaphor, an embodiment of lawlessness, greed, and isolation in an unforgiving land. Others suggest it's simply the desert's way of fighting back, a personification of danger, heat stroke, and the fear that arises when humans push too far into places they don't belong. But here's what makes the Arizona Devil so uniquely disturbing. It never acts. It appears, it watches, and then it's gone, not chasing you, just reminding you that it could. And if the devil can walk among us disguised as man or myth, the next creatures don't need disguise at all. They wear the faces of nature, the eyes of owls, the teeth of wolves, and slip through the cracks of Navajo and Apache legend. They're not skinwalkers, they're something else, something older, something wilder. Next, shape-shifting animal spirits, watchers of the night who never stopped watching. 30. Shape-shifting animal spirits, wolves, owls, and beyond. There are creatures in Arizona you don't see, you just notice. A flicker of movement in the corner of your vision, a coyote that watches a little too long, an owl that perches a little too still. You walk faster, not because you saw something dangerous, but because something familiar is behaving in a way that suggests it isn't what it seems. These are the shape-shifting animal spirits of Navajo, Apache, and other Southwest indigenous traditions, not the infamous skinwalkers, but an entirely different category of being. These spirits don't steal forms through witchcraft or corruption. They are, at their core, natural, just not the kind of natural you can track or trap. In many stories, these beings are not evil, but they're not entirely kind either. They are neutral forces, tied to the land, weather, and the thin boundaries between the spirit world and ours. They appear most often in the form of night animals, wolves, coyotes, owls, sometimes snakes, creatures that already carry symbolic weight in indigenous cosmologies. But the way they behave in these stories is what makes them different. Uncanny, wrong in precisely the right way. Take the owl, for example. Among the Apache, the owl is a harbinger, a messenger of death, transformation, or deep spiritual warning. Not all owls and not all the time, but when an owl stares into your window 3 nights in a row, or shows up during ceremony, or speaks in a voice you almost understand, that's not coincidence. That's a spirit arriving in a form your mind can tolerate. Barely. In some Navajo stories, wolves aren't just predators. They are watchers, guardians of thresholds. They mark the boundary between wilderness and the world of people. One tale describes a wolf appearing at the edge of a village for 7 nights, unmoving before a drought ended. When the villagers tried to thank it, it simply vanished, not walked away. Vanished. No tracks, no fur, no trace. Other accounts are more modern, whispered in truck stops and on hiking forums. A camper near the Chuska Mountains once reported hearing something circling his tent all night, not footsteps, breathing. In the morning, he found large canine prints, but only on one side of the tent, as if whatever had been there didn't walk around, but moved through the other side. Sometimes these animal spirits are described as changing mid glimpse, a coyote that becomes a bird mid stride, an owl that opens its wings and reveals hands, not in a horror movie way, more like the world glitching briefly, as if nature is debugging itself and you just happen to look up at the wrong moment. Skeptics will tell you these are misidentified animals, illusions caused by moonlight and nerves. They'll say that when you're alone in the desert long enough, everything starts to look like it has a soul. Maybe. Or maybe there are souls out there wearing fur and feathers, ancient intelligences that don't need language, just attention. Unlike skinwalkers who steal and corrupt, these spirits are keepers of memory, of space, of boundaries you didn't know you were crossing. And now here we are, 30 creatures deep, at the ragged edge of folklore and fear. But what have we actually found in Arizona's deserts, canyons, mesas, and dreams? Just stories? Or is it something else? Something that still walks, still waits, and still listens across time, shape, and belief? Because when you leave Arizona, you don't really leave. Something always follows, especially if it wants to be remembered.